I wanted to sit with you tonight and talk about how first and second dimension practice work together very skillfully to show you things that if you only meditated, you wouldn't see. Or if you went to a teacher who just sat in silence only, there would be just too much unconsciousness that wouldn't be seen in that. Or let's say you went to a teacher who just said, there's nothing to do and there's no one to do it. Just notice everything already appears to awareness. There would be a lot of unconsciousness and a lot of people in that kind of teaching that would never come into awareness. So why is that important? Because the universal definition of awakening process, as Ken Wilber has researched and told us, is something is unconscious, then that something comes into awareness and we see it as an object of awareness. And then it falls away back into awareness. And that in that process, there's a waking up that to which that comes and goes, all of that recognizes itself as itself. And words are always tricky, but it's this universal definition that I want to keep coming back to with you in this free non-duality series. Is that's universal. Ken researched that, and I can tell you that in all the inquiry that I've ever developed, that's how it was. Or when I wrote books, I was talking about the universal process of awakening. Some people and even teachers aren't aware of it because they haven't done the research into the old traditions and the mystic branches of the religions and all that, like Ken did. But that's what it is. And many teachers would agree, actually, because they're awake to what they are. And they know that no matter how it happened, their experience is that things come and go to what they are. And so what I am has no boundaries. What you are, I'm just going to point very directly for a second. What you are has no boundaries or borders. It's not contained. It's not inside or out or up or down or left or right or black or white or nice or mean or hurt or not or safe or unsafe or loving or hateful. It's just all of that appears to that. And here's the thing about when we say that, because in this teaching, we will not objectify awareness, because I've learned that if you keep saying awareness over and over without pointing to the bypass, we'll objectify it, which just means we'll make it into an object. And then by making it into an object, now we're safe from the buried emotions because it distracts our attention. And anything that can distract our attention from what we don't want to feel is what the repression is there to do. So that interferes with, obviously, the universal process of awakening. Because that repression mechanism always stays buried. The programming around it always stays buried. So you can never experience the awakening process around repression when we're just sitting together and being, or saying everything arises to no one, or saying the things that I just said. We still, in any of that, if we haven't gotten to repression, no matter how we fluff it up with great pointers and direct experience talk, suffering will continue. And that's the science, and that's your body. And so, then where do we go? I did a first teaching, and I've numbered them in the playlist so you can follow them. The first one was just kind of introducing, sitting with you, being, doing a little bit of second inquiry around recognizing that awareness is everything coming and going to that without hopefully objectifying it. And in fact, we did some inquiry in that first video about not objectifying it. And then at some point I gave you the video that describes the 3 dimensions of practice, that really technical video that I said, you must watch this before you start sitting with me on Sundays. And then, here we are with this video. And so now that you've watched that video of the maps and the resources, the two maps or two documents I had up, and if you haven't seen that, stop this video and go watch the playlist in order, please. Because I'm unfolding something for us slowly so that we can have the insights that we need to have at the pace that works for us. And you'll know something about me, the whole awakening thing, like becoming awake, or I don't have any urgency around that. And that can be triggering to some people because they come here and they're like, he's a non-duality teacher. He can help me wake up. I can. But the very mechanism that has that urgency around it, the seeking, is the repression mechanism buried in the body. So if I play into that, yeah, you might have a shift. We could point a little bit, but then the repression stays, and you might be a teacher who teaches from repression. So, but other than that, you might suffer. And so we have a bigger task in our hands other than just we are awareness. Bigger means you're bigger than just that recognition. What you are is indescribably indescribable. I mean, it's directly experience. It's direct experience only. And when we're rushing to something, we're objectifying something. See? So what are we looking for? What is it? Now let's do some inquiry around it first. Just say this like you're asking Siri, but you're just resting and allowing things to be. Show me what I'm seeking. And then when something comes up, just immediately notice and let it be. As if just have no agenda towards it. You're just curious, though. If it's words, you just hear it. Remember, the universal definition of awakening is something from the unconscious just came up. And then you're noticing it as an object in awareness. And then it falls away. So, what were you seeking? You pull that back up and so we can play with it for a moment because it's just a thought. And there's a reason that it came up. And this is why I'm not just a first dimension teacher. I want to do inquiry with you. So can we just like put out in front of you in awareness whatever it is that you're seeking and dress it up. Like really fucking dress it up. I mean, make it look like that's the ultimate thing that you could ever have. I mean, I've worked with people where we looked at a picture of a teacher and we just looked at his teeth. And the person I was working with just was emotionally hooked into his teeth. And so that's how repression works. Seeking is that we cannot be with our own emotional system, and anything that we can latch onto, and there are reasons that we latch onto certain things for safety and to get love, that becomes a distraction from actual freedom. So what are you seeking? There's your teeth, your version of it. Can you just pull it up in awareness and see the images, or like it's out of reach, whatever it is, the words, feelings of what you're seeking, maybe healing, enlightenment, freedom, a better relationship, being rich. Put that up, all of it, whatever it is. And then ask this. This is utility inquiry, second dimension. What do I get out of seeking that? I mean, what do I get? And you're feeling into the body when you say that. And just listening from awareness to what comes up from the sensations in the body. And immediately notice it. Here's the awareness, awakening. Again, something's coming up from the unconscious. Let it be as it is. It's an object in awareness. You can see or hear the thoughts. You can feel the sensations. They're happening to you, awareness. Let it be, and then it falls away at some point. So, but what am I getting? Say it again, because I want you to go deeper in this. What am I getting out of seeking? And I encourage people to journal with this teaching, and you'll understand why later. Because we're really unconscious, and when things come up, we really shouldn't just only witness things that have energy on them. You follow me? Because when something has energy on it, we're getting something out of that. We just don't know it. So it feels like contraction and words. It feels like suffering. But as we journal a little bit every day, we start to see something different. Is that, yeah, it looks like it's happening to me as suffering coming up here, but there's something else going on. Because when I journal every day, what that journal tells me is that I want this to be here. I stay safe and get love in life and in relationship by believing these things. So here's what we're doing here, just so you can follow along. One instruction is something that's going to happen outside of our time together. It's a journal. And I'm inviting everybody who's serious about me helping you to do this. And anybody who doesn't do this, let's talk about this for a second. I'll tell you what the journal is in a moment. And then we're going to come back to inquiry. But this is where the rubber meets the road on how repression drives the spiritual path. Because this utility journal is one of the greatest things that you can do here. But you can't see why in the beginning. It's giving you insights. But you see, your mechanism of repression doesn't want to see what's going to be on that journal. You don't want to see that. You bury this information. So this is why I'm asking you to journal it, so that you're going to do inquiry each day a little bit and then journal what comes up. And then that journal is something you can reflect on and look back at. And it's going to help you have insight into what's really going on with regard to suffering, so that you will not blindly just rest as awareness and think that suffering is just happening for no reason, and that you have no hand in that, even at the unconscious level, because you're creating it. There's no you. But the conditioning that's buried with your buried emotions, in that conditioning will be the thing you'll see are the things that you're going to come out and put on journal. It's going to come right out of your body and onto paper or your iPhone every day on this journal. So you're going to be journaling utility every day. And if you don't do it, that's the repression mechanism. Think about it, because that's what sabotage is. You came to me as a teacher on YouTube. There's no judgment, because I'm going to help you with that. That's the 3D work, is the sabotage. But I'm going to help you with as much as I can here in 1 and 2D to help you become conscious of what's really going on. If I give you this instruction to journal each day for, I would say, at least like a month. I mean, at the very least 2 weeks, but go for a month, because you're about to learn something really important if you do it every day. And here's what the instruction is. Just go about your day, whatever you're doing, and whenever you notice a recurring form of suffering, recurring means persistent, like it's a story that you often hear in your mind, or it's a feeling that you have but you don't really know what it is, or chronic pain that keeps coming back, depression, addictive cycles, recurring stuff like that. And then I want you to write down, to the best of your ability, what you believe about that. So let's say, let me give you an example. If I'm doing a utility journal and I'm someone who has depression, I'm going to discover, because if I'm doing this work here on YouTube with Scott Killaby, I'm going to learn some practices that are going to show me things about that depression. And because it's from an interior awareness, it's not depression. I mean, the childlike conditioning of repression doesn't know the word depression or repression. It only knows emotion and simple things like safe, love, I'm not okay, bad, wrong, good. Very, very sort of early stuff is deeply embedded in the body. And we want to get that out on the journal, because if we don't, it runs things. So let's say you're just going about the day. I'm someone who has depression. And today it's like, what's the point? And that's a recurring form of suffering. And let's say that just because you do awareness practices, or you have awareness in your experience, you just hear it. So you don't prompt it up during the day. That's first dimension, right? But you write it down, and you just write down, what's the point? It could be a question or it could be a statement. It's just a recurring form of suffering. And when you write it down, you immediately go into your body and rest as awareness. Feel into deep in the body where you hold the most density or contraction. Because third dimension works at that level, at the level of like the sense of separation, actually, physical sense. So we want to test that early here. So you feel into it and you say this: what do I get out of saying what's the point, or continuing to hear what's the point? And then you listen from that energy that you have your awareness into fully, and you immediately write down the first thing that comes up. And you don't interpret it, you just write it down. And then you go and do it again. You do it a couple of times each day, or each time you have something, because you want to see what's really there. So do it again, feeling into the body. What's the point is what it is. What do I get out of thinking what's the point a lot? What do I get out of it? And then immediately write it down. Or a very common one as you start to do work with me, or you already know, is like, no, I'm not good enough. It's not a question, it's an identity sort of, or a self-limiting belief. So let's say you're going about your day, but let's just talk about how second dimension works. In the first example, when I say first dimension, you already just hear the thought, what's the point? And so you do utility on it and journal that. But let's say you go about your day, or I'm still in depression, and I go about my day, and instead I don't know what's bugging me. And so that's the value of second dimension, prompting something up that's unconscious into awareness, to have more awareness around that suffering and more awareness around what you are, right? Okay, so going about my day, and it's just a feeling that, let's say, I have in my stomach, and it's persistent, remember, because it's persistent suffering that we're looking for, because that indicates repression is what it is. But it's what they say in spirituality is it's resistance, you could say. But that hides it from us because it's really buried emotions that you can't even access in first and second dimension. So you have to know that. I talked about that on the map, remember. Go back and watch that video that explains that, that's in the playlist. And that's well, I don't want to explain that, but you should watch everything in the playlist in order, please, because otherwise this stuff really won't make sense enough. So let's say I have this feeling in my stomach. I know that I have depression. I'm conscious of that. Remember when I said first dimension on the map? And I said you might be aware of depression in your awareness, but you wouldn't be aware of the repression buried that's creating it. Remember that? Right. So just remember that when you're journaling, that the stuff that's creating your suffering is all buried. And that when you feel into your body on something to do the utility inquiry, you're feeling into that buried stuff to get information with utility inquiry. So here, let's say I don't know what it means, though. I just have a feeling. And I don't know what that feeling means, but I have second dimension inquiry, which is mining. And I explained that in one of the videos. In that video, I explained it. What does this sensation mean about me? And then I listen. See there, I've prompted something up, but I immediately write it down so that I know, just because I'm journaling, that this sensation, it means this. It might mean something else tomorrow, but when I write it down, then I have something to work with for utility inquiry. So now that I've written it down, let's say what I wrote down is I'm not good enough, an identity. Well, now the utility inquiry is, what do I get out of believing I'm not good enough? And immediately write it down. See that? And do it a couple of times. Now, if you understand that instruction, you don't have to sabotage anything. We're going to get to that in a second, right? Because it's clear instruction. It's saying that anytime you notice recurring form of suffering, you don't have to go into deep inquiry if you don't know how or you don't want to. But always do the utility journal. So if you can't do that basic utility journal, you won't really be able to do this work in the end. You'll sabotage it somewhere because you'll remain unconscious to what's driving everything. And that's how sabotage works. So at least journal every day. And the 2 instructions that I've given you, they don't give you a way out of that, because whether you know what the suffering is, like in the first example, what's the point came up. And I heard that without prompting it up. So I wrote it down, and then I felt into my body and said, what do I get out of believing or saying, what's the point? I listened, I wrote down the answer. And that's when I know what it is. I'm aware of it. But on another time, if you're not aware of it, that doesn't give you an excuse, right? To just say, well, I'm not aware of it, so I'm not going to do it. Because that's how we stay unconscious. That's kind of first dimension bypass right there. That's the non-dual bypass. A big part of it is that if I'm just feeling a sensation, I'll just rest and let that be. But that sensation isn't happening for no reason. It's not persisting for no reason. And when you just rest with it, you hide the reason from yourself and you prolong suffering, because there's repression in there if it's persisting. It's keeping you safe, but you don't know it. So if you'll actually do inquiry and feel into that sensation and discover what the belief is there, which is with mining, that's the tool. Second dimension, you feel into it and you say, what does this energy mean about me? Or what does this sensation mean about me? Or another way to ask is, if this sensation had a voice, what would it say? Write these things down to remember those 2 forms of mining. What does this sensation mean about me? And the other one is, what does this sensation have to say right now? If it had a voice, what would it say? Now, 2 things about that. You want to write that down because that's your utility journal. That's the reason that you do it every day, is to write down what the utilities are. But at that moment, you can also do inquiry, which is helpful to be more aware of what is, to bring relief from that. That's a recurring form of suffering. So it doesn't hurt to go then into inquiry. Because, for example, let's say, what's the point? I mean, what do you do with that? It's something that comes up, it's reoccurring, but it's probably the kind of thing that just it's pretty unconscious still. You wake up in the morning and life feels pointless. Because it's still unconscious. It's just, people will say that stuff like that is almost more like a feeling. And what they're saying is that the mind stuff is buried. They don't really know where that comes from. And the actual emotions that create it are buried. And that's repression. So by journaling, that person starts to become more conscious. Anyone who's suffering does in this work by journaling. Because instead of just resting and allowing stuff, that's the danger of first dimension on reoccurring suffering. Persistent suffering, I do not at all recommend. Just resting and allowing recurring suffering all the time, because that's coming there for a reason. And if you just rest and allow it, then the root of that doesn't come into awareness. And so that's more suffering. But even more than that, the buried emotions remain buried, and you might be developing a spiritual practice that solidifies the fact that you have no idea that there are buried emotions creating suffering. You don't want that. So the utility journal is the thing that stops you from bypassing, or starts you on the road to not bypassing in those ways. That's how important it is. So I think you know how to do the utility. You guys can ask questions in the comments here. I'll try to answer. Let's talk about sabotage here. This is one of those strange and ironic moments, because I just gave you an invitation to a practice that could end your bypassing if you journal every day, the utilities. It could start to. It's not going to do it right away, because you're going to resist that at first. And you might come back to me and say, why isn't this working? And I'll say, well, are you doing the utility journal? Because I didn't give you that just as a homework assignment. I do not feel like your father or an authority figure ultimately. I'm trying to help you. that it's unconsciousness, and you can't just witness deep buried programming by being in awareness. And so if you're really going to do a spiritual practice, that's it. For now, where we're at, I'm asking everyone to do utility journal, because when you ask me a question, I'm going to ask you that. But why? I'm not going to be mean about it at all, because I want to help you. And if you haven't journaled, we can talk about sabotage. Very lovingly, I'll say, look, that could be that you intended, this is sabotage. I came to Scott Kiloby's teaching. It's free on YouTube. He gave me this exercise. He said it's going to really help with this inquiry process. But then I did it for 3 days and I stopped. And now I don't want to ask Scott because I'm afraid of, it's shameful or whatever. And that's the repression driving sabotage. So what I want to do is something different here. I want to invite you to journal. And when you fail at it, that just becomes part of the practice. And that's all that is. So if you don't tell me, that's fine, but you have to understand that that's how I see it. I don't see it like, oh, you didn't do it. Oh, you haven't been doing it. I don't even think you should be here anymore. I don't know what you're doing. Get out of my fucking meeting. No, I don't do that. You'll never see me raise my voice unless it's somebody who's like trolling or just being rude and distracting people. No, I'm going to say, look, remember the utility journal? Have you been doing that? If you say yes, we're going to draw from that on your question. And it's going to help so much with whatever your question is. Trust me, we're going to like resonate together in a really deep way. But if you don't do the utility journal, it's like the unconsciousness is here, and making sure that we don't get to whatever's buried. And if one way we can do it is to not do the journal, this is all unconscious, then we'll do it that way. And if another way is to make sure we don't ask Scott or say something or go get mentorship, is what you might need really. Really, mentorship is the way is what we're learning. But you may be not ready because you're not asking questions, you're not doing the journal. Well, all I can say is, if you don't reach out to someone who understands how emotional repression and trauma drives that sabotage, I don't know how you're going to get out of it. And maybe sometimes the best thing a teacher can do is just tell you the truth of that and just encourage you, for example, to go do mentorship or even one session with somebody to get at the root of that. But if you ask a question publicly, I can answer it, See, that's how we sabotage ourselves, is we don't ask a question and then we don't go to mentorship or do a session. See that? But yet you've come to me for help and I've given you an instruction. And I don't blame you for that, because we were hurt as kids. And I look like an authority figure, but I'm actually not. I'm just a 54-year-old guy, sitting in an apartment. But that's all it is. It's just your own fear. And that's what I'm here to help you with, if you'll open to this process. Meaning, when you don't do it, can you reach out or discover why you don't, or ask a question? Because these are the moments when you take action in some way that changes things. So utility journal is just part of this. And then I wanted to also spend some time today talking about what am I asking you to do or suggesting? Am I suggesting you to do anything in your life? This is where I definitely disagree with some teachers. And I talked about this with the map out in the earlier video. You see, there's this belief system or this paradigm going around with some people that I shouldn't do there's nobody here. There's nobody to do anything, Scott. So you're suggesting a utility journal or inquiry? Or even noticing thoughts. Isn't that somebody doing something? And I can tell you, that's repression protecting the shit out of you. I mean, look, if I want to stay away from my buried emotions, that's the belief system I'm going to pick up in spirituality, is that I shouldn't do anything. That keeps me safe. See, if people like that would do utility journal, they would discover this reoccurring thing. There's nobody to do method. I shouldn't do a method. But they don't realize that the repression's running it, and they don't have the skill, and they won't do the method to see it. So they've locked themselves into more suffering and a bypass. But if that person would just start utility journaling and say, I shouldn't do a method, write that down. And then feel into the body fully where there's really deep contraction and say, I mean, first of all, if you don't think you're getting anything out of it, say it this way. I'm not getting anything out of saying I shouldn't do a method or a practice. Just to see if your body disagrees at all with any movement or contraction. Say it a few times, feel deeply into it, because repression runs things. I don't get anything out of saying I shouldn't do a method. If you have any contraction, a small contraction doesn't mean a little bit of repression. It could just mean a lot of repression buried. So any movement starts to get you to trust yourself a little bit more. When you say every method shouldn't be done, you're not even trusting yourself. You're trusting a belief system that somebody passed on to you, or you're coming from fear, but you won't investigate it, or some wisdom that you think that you have, but if you're suffering, you're suffering. And suffering is the great teacher. Because it teaches us that what we're doing in our kind of natural state as humans is demanding suffering and then pretending like we're not doing it. Creating suffering and then picking up practices that pretend like we're not creating it, or pointers. And unless we journal, we'll buy into all of that, or some of that is all we need to buy into for the repression mechanism to keep us safe and get us love and continue suffering. So it doesn't matter what the recurring form of suffering is, journal it, especially on anything that's resisting this work. Sabotage. And I highly encourage everybody who's going to start journaling to journal mainly and first on any sabotage reoccurring patterns. Like, I don't want to do this. If you don't, you lock yourself into that bypass because you're driven on the need for emotional safety and for love. And what you're saying is, I need safety and love, but I refuse to see that. Stubborn almost at the unconscious level. So when you say, I don't want to do this, see, you're not even trusting yourself to see if there's benefit there because you're believing something. So I don't want to do this. Put that on your journal. And then feel into the body and say, what do I get out of believing I don't want to do this? And listen. And write it down. And do that with any recurring sabotaging patterns first, in the first few weeks after you listen to this video. Let this be the beginning really of, or close to the beginning, you may have already started, of your KI practice by doing utility journal on all recurring patterns of suffering if you want to, but especially any that are sabotaging here. So let me list those things off, things to look for. Because if you don't look for this, your repression is protecting you from even being here. And that's not open, right? That's very self-protective because you don't even know what's being offered here yet. I've just begun. So any triggers towards me, please do utility journal. Because if you sabotage your relationship, your openness towards me, I can help you with suffering in a lot of relationships. But if you close me off early because of an uninvestigated and unjournaled trigger, then that's the repression keeping you safe. And you don't believe me, just do the utility journal. And that way you'll give up your dependence on authority and your triggers at them if you'll just start doing utility on your triggers towards me. So it'll be like, I don't even know if I like him. Great, because I don't care. Write it down. I'm just trying to show you how to be free. Write it down. I don't like Scott Killaby. I don't mean I don't care as in a negative. I mean, I don't have anything on that. I'm just saying that you might. That's what I'm saying. So put it down. I don't like Scott. Doesn't matter if you don't know why. If you don't know why, or if you do, write it down. Because that's a sabotage. You're here listening, but you don't like me. See, if I wouldn't listen to someone like that. If I knew it wasn't coming from trauma and I just didn't like someone, I would just stop listening. But when it's coming from trauma, there's like this double bind or this thing where it's like, I don't like him and he triggers me and I'm still here. So if you're still here, then use that, right? I don't like him. What do I get? Put it down. So the two things I'm asking you to do as you start this work for Utility Journal is to utility on sabotaging patterns, generally, like not wanting to do anything that I suggest or something that I suggest, and triggers towards me, which could be anything at all. You have to journal it and do utility. And then the last thing is this. If you get anything other than for utilities, this is how I stay safe and get love. You should ask me a question about that, or you should do a little bit more utility inquiry and write down, because that's how we stay safe, is by not sticking with that. Because here's how much we trust those two utilities. Stay safe and get love. It's universal. It's science. In other words, I've talked to you about Donald Hoffman. He talks about the evolutionary research, which says that we're never experiencing reality. We're only experiencing what they call fitness payoffs. And that just means what we need to experience to survive and procreate. And in KI, we experience that directly, in direct experience in our programming, if we will do utility journal. It becomes a science-supported path from the beginning, because you're discovering that in your own body, hidden, sorry, I'm picking my dog up, hidden in your body are those utility payoffs. And when you believe something that makes you suffer, or you sabotage a path, or you get triggered at an authority that you came to for help, there are fitness payoffs there. You're staying safe and getting love. You're surviving and procreating. But see, that's the scientist's way of saying it. That's pretty removed from our experience. You're staying safe from the buried stuff. The repression is listening to me teach, and since it runs things, it's producing triggers, shadows, sabotage. I hate Scott to keep you safe. And all that suffering, those are your fitness payoffs. Those are your utilities. So I'm asking you to journal those so that you do something totally different here and get to the sabotage early, or else you'll be gone within a matter of whenever, because your unconscious wants that. Or you'll sit here and hate me for a while and then you'll leave and you won't process it. Or some people just stop listening because they'll say, oh, well, I know he's talking about the root of suffering, but then they get distracted and like shiny nickel. And all of it is so innocent because you're not supposed to listen to me. There's nothing in the universe that says that. But if you resonate with this, then I think you might want to. And that's where sabotage comes in, to look at that. And what you want to do is start by utility journaling. Now, you might say, show me how to work with sabotage. Well, isn't that the sabotage? Because this is a teaching that I'm going to unfold for you. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't lead you into a bypass. And I'm already teaching you how to end sabotage, but you can't just end it right away. So the last thing I want to say before I go is about seeking. And that's the third area that I think that you should journal in the next few weeks. Utility journaling, that. So we have anything towards me or the work, which might be keeping you from doing it. That's one area. And then we have this one also. And the third one I mentioned a second ago. I'm not going to go over that. But this is important, guys. And maybe in some ways the most important conversation for those who are seeking. Because we know, like everything else, that comes from repression. We've done the work here. We've seen it. And you may not know yet. And if you don't do the utility journal, you'll keep buying into the narratives out there, being driven by people, in some cases who have repression, who don't know that by using certain words, you're being distracted, let me say it that way. Because even if I sit here and objectify presence or don't objectify it and say it's here now, if I don't talk about repression, you might keep coming back and seeking whatever it is that I'm pointing to, and not understanding that when you come back, that's the repression trying to stay safe. Because I'm not getting you and showing you to the root of suffering, showing you the root of suffering. There's the seeking. Or you're sitting there and you just need to go, you start reading books a lot or looking at things, and you know you're seeking, and you know it's coming from, it's suffering, but you don't know what to do with it. And a lot of the first and second dimension teachers will tell you some things that I'm going to tell you, actually, that will be helpful for seeking. But what I want to make sure you do is the utility journal early on that, because I want you to see what you get out of seeking. And the reason I want to do that is so that we have a better relationship as so-called teacher-student, because you're going to ask me seeking questions and time questions, which are all seeking questions, which are like, how long will this take? But see, if you would journal that early, like right now, you would say, well, I write it down and say, well, what do I get out of asking, how long will that take? And remember, what I'm saying is if you get anything other than what science and what we're seeing here, if you get anything other than safety or love, you should reach out for somebody to help you, because that's your unconsciousness there. It's really safety and love for most people, or everyone. But there's different wording for it, and it can sometimes sound different. So if you say, what do I get out of seeking enlightenment, for example, you'll find, oh, stay safe, get love. At first, you'll just feel a contraction, but if you listen and keep asking, write it down. Because what that does is when you ask a question, I'll say, but look, from this standpoint, what we're saying is this about time and seeking. We're creating that from the unconscious level. That's the 3D work. And if you're not open to the 3D work, I can only work with you. This is why I'm doing it. You guys won't, if you won't come do the 3D work, I'm just saying, okay, for free, I'll just do 1 and 2D. And I want to help end your suffering. That's what I want to do. That's what a good teacher does. And this is what I'm going to say about this. If you'll start journaling, first, your beliefs around seeking, whatever they are, doesn't matter. I'm not there yet. Write it down. If it comes up, if it's a recurring seeking story, what do I get out of that? I want you to get your journal going where you see consistently that you get safety or love or something, some unmet need that you didn't know out of seeking. So that when you ask a question, we're going to go back to that. And you're going to say, how long will it take? And I want to say, well, but you've been journaling, and so you know that you're asking the question to stay safe. But if you're not journaling, then of course we're going to sit here and bamboozle each other like teachers do. And we pretend like that's not repression. And then we give spiritual answers like, well, just rest as awareness. There's nobody here. Let that thought be. The thought that's asking the question, how long will it take? That's not you. I'm telling you, that's not skillful, because yes, I'm going to have you do that, but that alone is not skillful, because you're not becoming conscious and having insight to see how you're creating the seeking and the question towards me to stay safe from what you buried. And if I'm going to be a good teacher, I'm going to point that out. And if I'm going to be a good teacher, I'm going to say, well, do the utility journaling. It's okay if you haven't done it. You wouldn't believe how I sabotaged it while I was developing this work. But then it's always an open invitation to go back to journaling it, and then to come back and see, is the question there? And if the question is still there, it just means the energy behind it is there, which means there's repression. And I'm going to take you into some second dimension inquiries if you're not open to third dimension, because third dimension to me is the answer. But you can't pull someone into that. I'm going to give you everything I have as a teacher in second dimension to help you in that seeking. At the same time, I'm going to educate you of one big risk here in non-duality, and I fell into it. I mean, it's a danger, and you can easily fall into it, which is you don't want to put your seeking to rest and then just recognize presence and say that you're done. Highly, what's the word? That's not a good way to say it, but I don't recommend that. Highly not recommended. Don't do it, because that's the bypassing. That's the thing in you that's objectifying this awakening thing to get away from the buried stuff. And so if you just focus on putting seeking to rest, you're probably going to go sit with teachers who focus in that way. And it's going to be difficult to embody that from this perspective with this work, because that's what I did, is I essentially witnessed thoughts of seeking, and they came to rest, and there was the recognition, or a recognition, both gradual and sudden, that I'm the awareness. And then I got cancer. And then there was a sex addiction. And then spinal stenosis and suicidal ideation. Pretty dark night. So you have to be careful with the attitude is that this is about ending seeking, because it's not. It's about recognizing and embodying what you are. And you can't do that if you don't know on some level from the beginning that you're creating your own your own suffering to stay safe and get love, to survive as a separate self. And if you journal every day, we're going to get to the root of that. Thank you for listening.